Do you have a child or a grandchild you'd like to start saving for college? Do you have a 529 plan? If you don't, would you like to know the details around a 529 plan to help your future student? Hi, I'm Garrett Ray, financial planner here at the Wealth Guardians and the Ray Financial Group.
And I'm Brice Payne, and you've entered The Vault, the Wealth Guardians video series on all things pertaining to retirement planning. In this episode, we're going to talk about what 529 plans are, what different types of 529 plans there are out there, what are the contribution limits for those, and what are some key features of them, and what can they be used to pay for. Don't forget to hit these like and subscribe buttons down below the screen there if you want to go ahead and catch future episodes of The Vault with Doug, Garrett, and myself. But let's go ahead and get started on this topic. Garrett, start us off. What are 529 plans? I've always heard the term.
Yep. So simply put, 529 plans are tax advantage savings plans to encourage folks to start saving for future education costs for a loved one. So why the name 529? It gets its name from the section 529 of the Internal Revenue Code, which basically allows these entities to exist.
I did not know that. All right.
Legally, they're known as qualified tuition plans. And these plans typically are sponsored by the 50 individual states, in some cases, state agencies or the educational institutions themselves. So a university themselves may have a 529 plan available.
Okay, the way I've always looked at them, you're talking about tax advantages, is think of a Roth. It's after-tax money that grows tax-free as long as you wait until you're 59 and a half to use that money. A 529 is kind of the same thing. It's after-tax monies that grow tax-free as long as you ultimately end up using them for educational purposes.
Yeah, and we'll talk about kind of later in the video what they define as educational purposes. Yeah. You actually have a pretty wide variety of things you can spend on, but we'll definitely cover it in the features section.
It's broader now than it was. Okay, so Garrett, you mentioned that there are different types of 529 plans. I think there's two main types. Talk to us about these.
Yeah, there's definitely two main types. The first one is certainly more popular than the other, but let's talk about the two types. The first type is just an education savings plan. The second is a prepaid tuition plan. So let's talk about the details around them. So going back to the first one, an education savings plan, these work a lot like a Roth, where investments inside them are tax deferred and distributions from the account are tax free when they're used for qualified educational purposes. And again, we're going to touch on what that covers here in a moment. Let's talk about the second type, a prepaid tuition plan. This plan allows people, if they've got a targeted university or group of universities, let's say, the university system of North Carolina, since we're here in North Carolina, you can actually purchase units or parts of tuition expenses in today's dollars for a future student. So if we assume that the cost of education is universally going to rise as time goes on,
probably a pretty safe assumption.
Pretty safe assumption. So effectively what you're doing is you're buying in today's dollars parts going towards that tuition for a future date. And that's the way that it works. So in the long run, assuming education costs do rise, that equals lower cost of education for your student because you're paying today's dollars for it.
So in the first kind, an educational savings plan, you invest that money and it grows. Let's say that you assume that growth was going to be, say, 5% a year.
Sure.
But if you believe that college tuition is going to go up 10% a year, you might be better off to go with the second type because you're getting a better return on your money that way.
That is one way to certainly look at it.
One way to look at it. Okay.
The first example is a general investment portfolio that you're expecting to grow enough to pay for that education when that student is actually going to college.
Exactly.
In the second example, you're targeting a specific institution or group of institutions that you'd like your student to have credits towards their tuition.
Right. Yes. All right. So then are there contribution limits to these 529 plans?
So the answer to that around contribution limits to 529 plans is yes and no. So let's talk about it. There is technically no limit on how much one can contribute in any given year.
Okay.
But almost all states cap on the total amount of contributions you can make throughout the life of the plan. So as mentioned earlier, we're here filming in North Carolina, so I wanted to cover North Carolina and some of the surrounding states. The state of North Carolina currently has a lifetime contribution limit of $550,000 per 529 plan. South Carolina, $540,000. Tennessee, $350,000. Georgia has $235,000.
Wow.
And Virginia, $550,000.
You got all these memorized.
Yeah.
Right.
If you find yourself outside of one of those states, a quick Google search can get you there. I did a cursory glance this morning before filming. The only state I found that didn't have any limit was the state of Wyoming for some reason. So
About that.
yeah, interesting.
Okay. So what are some of these key features of 520? What can they be used to pay? What can you use these for? I think that's kind of the main thing we want to get to here, right?
Yeah, so we're going to spend the majority of our time on this segment. What can you actually pay for using a 529 plan? So as mentioned before, originally these were designed to pay for traditional 4-year university and postgraduate degrees, your master's, your PhDs, that sort of thing. Interestingly enough, in 2017 and 2019, Congress expanded the scope of 529 slowly. And so in those 2 years, they did allow these plans to cover some kindergarten through 12th grade costs. That's currently limited in 2024, as we film today, at $10,000 per year. So perhaps you may be paying for some sort of private school, that sort of thing. Up to $10,000 per year can come from a 529 plan. Let's talk about who can open a 529 and that sort of thing.
Okay.
Technically, anybody can open a 529. Normally, you see parents and grandparents opening 529 plans for a child or a grandchild who is the designated beneficiary of that plan. Now, as you're contributing to the 529 plan, some states allow you to take a tax deduction or a deduction in income towards that contribution plan at the state level. Currently not available.
Not at the federal level.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's talk about once you have a 529 plan, how does it work? Account holders can choose the individual investments that they invest inside of. Typically, these are mutual funds, but it's not unlimited like inside of an IRA. It's a limited amount of mutual funds, much like your 401k plans you've seen out there. But you'll probably have a dozen to 2 dozen options to choose from. What do these mutual funds look like? A majority of them look like target date funds. So if you're familiar with those inside your 401k, the idea is when your child or grandchild is much younger, say 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, the investments are relatively aggressive, and then they start to get more and more conservative as that child approaches college age, effectively trying to protect your investment right up to the point of use. What's interesting now, though, is they've also expanded the scope of the 529 plan to outside of traditional college expenses. What do we mean by that? So now they've qualified payments towards registered apprenticeship programs in the trade skills. So electricians, plumbers, welders, certain type of carpentry and design apprenticeships, things like that are now or like your technical colleges are also open up to 529s. They also added this, Brice, which was interesting. This was a recent change with Secure Act in 2022.
Right.
They now allow up to $10,000 coming out of that 529 plan to go towards student loan debt. So let's say you had a student that went through college. Maybe you got a late start into your 529 plan, so they had to take out some student loans. Well, if you've got $10,000 saved up in that 529, you can basically send that to your beneficiary and it can go towards his or her student loans. Last thing that we'll cover on here, and I thought this was really great, Secure Act that was passed in 2022 also now allows up to $35,000 of unspent monies inside of 529. So let's say all of your children or grandchildren are now graduated and you've got unspent monies inside your 529. You can now roll that $35,000 out to a Roth IRA as long as your 529 plan is at least 15 years old or older.
Okay.
So it has to be a well-established 529, and there has to be unspent monies, but you still have an end use for them in that you can roll them out to a Roth IRA.
That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, Garrett. I know every state has assigned a custodian or administrator for their specific 529 plans, but there is no rule. Let's say that we're North Carolina residents. There is no rule saying that you have to invest in the North Carolina 529 plan.
That's true.
You might feel that the Wyoming or some other state has a better chance for growth in their ESP mutual funds that are available out there. You might want to go with that one. There's no rule saying that you can't do that, and they're good for any college.
Absolutely, yeah. Particularly if you're in the first type, just a pure education savings plan where you're just trying to grow that money for a period of time and then use it for qualified educational expenses. There's no reason to be held captive, so to speak, to your home state. If you feel like another state has a more competitive options, feel free to go with that.
And don't be discouraged. Think, well, I have no idea what state my child is going to go to college in, so why would I open a North Carolina 520? That money is not just good for North Carolina colleges. Be aware of that. It's good for any accredited college.
Absolutely. Great point, Brice.
Very good. All right. Well, anything else we want to add about 529 plans?
I will mention that there is something called a Coverdale plan out there, and we thought about making 529s and Coverdales in the same episode. I believe we're going to stick for Coverdales in a separate episode, so be on the lookout for that.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you for all that, Garrett. That's very informative. That's going to wrap it up for this episode of The Vault. I'm going to again bring your attention to these like and subscribe buttons down below the screen there. Go ahead and click on those if you want to catch future episodes of all things pertaining to retirement planning with Doug, Garrett, and myself. For this episode, I'm Brice Payne.
And I'm Garrett Ray.
And this has been The Vault.